Uh, so my name is Suleiman, and I work as a director of pharmacy services for a health tech startup that's focused on improving community pharmacy services in Africa, specifically Nigeria and Kenya. Within the FIP, I work with the YPG project team, serving as the coordinator for professional development. And I'll be facilitating today in addition to the panelists. So a quick general housekeeping. I'd like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded for knowledge sharing purposes. Feel free to become a member of the FIP by going to the website. At different intervals within this presentation today, there will be opportunities for questions to our panelists. Please feel free to use the Q&A function on Zoom, and we would be checking at intervals to make sure we get back to all of them. And please, we welcome feedback to the panelists and the organizers at various points here. The FIP's vision is a world where everyone benefits from access to safe, effective, quality, and affordable medicines and health technologies. Our mission is to support global health by enabling the advancement of pharmaceutical practice, science, and education. This webinar, which is the third of the Career Development Toolkit post-publication series, is titled Effectively Developing Transferable Skills and the Positive Impacts of Training and Certifications in Career Progression.
Suleiman, sorry to disturb you, we cannot see your slides.
Oh, give me a second. Fix that. Do we see it now?
Yes, thank you.
During the course of today's webinar, we will provide an overview of the importance of developing transferable skills in various areas of pharmacy practice. We will be highlighting relevant trainings and certifications early career pharmacists can have to help their career growth. Discuss practical examples in real-life workplace scenarios on how to apply these transferable skills and also answer transferable skills and career development related questions. We have with us today a rich selection of panelists who have extensive experience in the learning and development and the training of pharmacies, whether it's through academia or their experience in various aspects of pharmacy. So it would be a really rewarding experience today. So I would be calling up our first presenter, Professor Pierre, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Suleiman, and welcome to everyone. So my task is to talk about communication skills and conflict management. So if I can have the next slide, please. So I'm currently Dean of the Faculty of Pharmacy at Kuwait University. I was previously a Dean at the Faculty of Pharmacy at University of Montreal in Canada. So today I will address communication skills with three angles: seeing it as a shared responsibility, creating engagement, and talking less and listening more. And then I'll address conflict resolution with why it matters, possible outcomes, and how to find a win-win solution. So if we go to the next slide, you will see that why is it important to communicate? And this is something I took from the literature, where more than a quarter of hospital readmissions could be avoided with better communication amongst healthcare teams and between providers and patients. So that's very, very significant. We're talking about 25% of readmission. So basically, intra and interprofessional communication means that you are working in teams with the shared objective, of course, of optimal patient care. So I will be using the team structure as my kind of segue into communication. And if you look at this model, team dynamics are going through different phases. The first one is forming, Then it's storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. So during the forming phase, if you can click once, Suleiman, it's the orientation. It's where everyone is get to know each other and try to make a good impression, learn about the others, their strengths, their weaknesses, and share expectations and boundaries. During the storming phase, this is where it's a little bit more tricky. People are trying to get their opinion across, get their way of doing things. So this is where the boundaries are challenged and the conflict could arise. And finally, when things are going smooth and the conflicts are resolved, then we can agree on how to work together, which systems to use, which communication tools we're expected to use, and the expectations and ground rules and so on are becoming clear. So if we, on the next slide, look at the same process of team dynamics, but now look at the communication aspect. So for the forming phase, we need general communication skills, and of course I'll deal with that in the next slides. We should use assertive communication, active listening, and especially during the storming phase, these two tools will be very important, but we'll also have to add conflict resolution to make sure that we can get to the norming phase, that is the phase that's very important before getting to performance of a team. So on the next slide, I will again focus mainly on these aspects and not on teamwork, which happens later on. So communication, 3 key behaviors for success. So first, you should see communication as a shared responsibility and shared between the sender of the message, so the one who talks, and the receiver, so the one who listens. And sometimes you'll be the talker, sometimes you'll be the listener. Then we have to create engagement into the communication. And finally, trying to talk less and listen more. This is 3 key behaviors for successful communication, and we'll dive into those right now. So a shared responsibility. So when I'm talking, I should try to be assertive. That means, let's say, confident, but not aggressive. I should be respectful and balanced. I should try to state my opinion, not necessarily attack or defend, but really having my opinion. I should use I, but not be too emotional. Just to give you an example, I could say, to a colleague that is often late to let's say, a meeting with other colleagues from different disciplines, I feel embarrassed when the whole team has to wait for you. Instead of saying you always arrive late. So no blaming, just being assertive that, how do you feel about this situation? Don't be too apologetic as well. This is one of the first thing I learned as a pharmacy student. When you call the physician because you need information, you should not start with, oh, I'm sorry to disturb you. If you're disturbing someone, it's because what you're asking is not important, not relevant. So if you are taking the time to call another professional, you should not be apologetic, but get to the point and don't apologize for doing it if you're doing it for the sake of the patient. And also use positive sentences as much as possible. And normally when you refuse or you have to say no, you can kind of sandwich it in between 2 positive sentences. For instance, if a colleague asks you to come and see a patient and you don't have time right now, what you could say is, I know you really want this to be done quickly. However, I have to attend a really unstable patient. Can we do it later? I would really love to do this with you. You see how instead of saying, no, I can't, no, I don't have time, it really, the message comes across much more effectively and more interestingly for the receiver as well. But communication is not just about talking, and we'll talk about assertive communication in the next slides, but it's also about listening. Not just, if you can go back one, it's also about listening, not just hearing. And we'll also discuss this later on, but it requires active engagement on your part when you're the listener to provide undivided attention, not interrupting, repeating what you have heard, which is active listening, and also observing the speaker and encourage their talking. So we'll come back to this, but this is really seeing communication as a shared responsibility. So on the next slide, we'll talk about assertive communication. So communication can be normally 4 different types. So it could be aggressive, where we want to win, passive aggressive, where we're indirectly passing our message. It could be passive, so we are submissive, or it can be assertive. And if you look at the 4 sentences that are there, I'll give you a couple seconds to read them, but you should find which one is assertive. So I hope you all chose the second one, which is assertive communication. I'm confident. I know I can make mistakes, but I'm still confident in my way of expressing it. So on the next slide, assertive communication is expressing positive or negative ideas and feelings in an open, honest, and direct way. It should be flexible enough, like we just saw, for compromises, for accepting that we can make mistakes, but it should be composed of a planned content to stay on message, so we don't have these parentheses everywhere that the message doesn't stay on focus. We should use appropriate voice, tone, and emphasizing keywords as well when we talk, keeping good eye contact, and have a confident body posture. So the next skill, or the next way of doing good communication, is to creating engagement. And this is all about the nonverbal communication, or most about nonverbal communication, because when you interact with others, you're continuously giving and receiving wordless signals that send a strong message. And in the literature, up to 93% of your message could be conveyed through the nonverbal aspect of your communication. So it's very important to create this engagement. And the most important thing is to make sure that your nonverbal is matching your verbal. So when your nonverbal signals the same as your verbal, you will create trust, clarity, you will have a strong rapport. However, if you don't match them, then people will not really trust you. It could create a lot of confusion. For instance, looking at your smartphone while saying that you care, that's it, the discussion is important for you. This is a mismatch that will create confusion and mistrust into the person that would like to talk to you. So making eye contact, smiling, devoting your attention to the other will show that you're approachable, open, inclusive, authentic, caring. All these things are important to engage yourself and the other into a fruitful communication. The third behavior is talk less and listen more. So this is related to active listening, which is a technique to maximize understanding of what the other has to say by making a conscious effort to listen carefully. So this will improve your ability to influence, persuade, and negotiate, because you really know where the other one stands, and it will make you more productive. It can also help you avoid and resolve conflict. So this is very important to use as a technique during conflict management, and we'll talk about that later. So on the next slide, we can see 5 steps of active listening. So the first step is really about the other colleague body language. So by looking at them, looking at their way they present themselves, you can see if their emotions, their state of mind, you can see if they are, embarrassed, you can see if they are angry, you can see if they are open-minded, or if they come with a very closed approach. So this is very important, just to size a little bit how they feel about the communication that's going to unfold. Then you have to avoid distractions to make sure that you focus really on the conversation. Then you have to show that you're listening. So this is your own body language. Again, like we said earlier, smile, maintain eye contact, have an open posture, encourage the other to continue. And then to really show that you are there and you're actively engaged, you have to ask questions, provide feedback, summarize. So it's not about you, it's about them. So it's not the time to say, oh yes, for me, I do this, but you ask questions about them. Why do they feel this way? What happened? So be curious about them, not about you. And then, of course, defer judgment and try not to interrupt so that they can have their thoughts provided to you uninterrupted. And of course, then you have to respect their opinion. We all have opinions. You may have a different opinion, but it doesn't mean it's better. So you should respect their opinion. Doesn't mean you share their opinion, but it's important to respect it and listening so that you understand where they stand. So now, so we talked about general communication skills, assertive communication, active listening. Now we'll move towards when things are not going perfectly well, when we do have conflict. So conflict is inevitable. People thinking that conflict, is something rare that should not happen, that we should always prevent it. Conflict will happen and it's normal. We just have to learn how to deal with it. And the first thing to know is that it should not remain unsettled, especially in a team that needs to work on a daily basis, because it can become a source of anxiety. You all know that if there's a colleague, that we're not, on the same page with them, sometimes it creates a lot of pressure, anxiety, and we don't feel good around them. We just want to leave work. So absenteeism is a problem with conflict. Negativity at work, so it creates all this negative thing that doesn't, makes us want to stay at home and not go to work. So this is important to understand, and as soon as you feel these things, you have to address the conflict and not avoid it, and we'll see how we can do that. Of course, conflict interferes with team performance, and as long as there are conflicts, you will not get into the next phases of team dynamics, which is the norming. And sorry, if you can come back one slide, please. So we will not get to the next phases of team towards performance. So the patient care will be suboptimal as long as conflicts are present in the team. So conflict is, where does it come from? It's normally a struggle between people with opposing needs, ideas, beliefs, values, or goals. And it can happen when people have different communication styles. For instance, we talked about assertive communication, but someone may feel or see this or perceive this as aggressive communication. So again, you may have to balance the way you express yourself to make sure you take into consideration how the other one feels about it. It could be also a clash of expectations. For instance, you may expect, your colleague to do the medication review in the morning, but your colleague prefers to do them in the afternoon. So if he doesn't know what your expectations are, and you become frustrated because he never does it in the morning, but you never told him, he cannot read your mind. You have to express it and make these expectations clear so that you can work well in the team. The roles and status, of course, as a supervisor, some people use it as a way of imposing their views and not allowing any flexibility. So this is something that can also be causing, for instance, in a preceptor-student relationship, can become a source of conflict. And also other conflicts can come from different generations using different modes of communication, values, and ethics. So on the next slide, we can see what are the possible outcomes of resolving a conflict. And you have on the y-axis your assertiveness from low to high, and on the x-axis cooperativeness from low to high again. So if everything is low, that means you are avoiding, basically nobody wins, but you are avoiding the situation, just pushing it back into the future. So it's probably, it could be good if you don't need to work with this person again in your life, but if it's a team member and you need to work with them, this is probably not the best solution. All these solutions are possible, but they have to be applied to your situation. And most of the time for a team, a healthcare team working together, it's important that you go towards the collaborating and compromising parts of this diagram. So competing means that you're right, and the other one is wrong, and you will prove him wrong, and you're really trying to win. So you win, they lose. This is not a win-win situation, but sometimes this is an outcome that is appropriate. Accommodating is the opposite. You may say, okay, I think I'm right, but it's not that big of a deal. And, to keep our professional relationship okay, I will just say, okay, it's fine. Let's use your idea. So this is accommodating. Then they win, you lose, but, in a way that, keeps the relationship alive. So compromising is in between. Everybody's, leaving a little bit behind to make sure that we can move forward for the patient. But of course, the best is try to collaborate and put our energy together to find the best solution for the patient. And this is what our team should be really working towards in terms of the outcomes. So how do you reach the outcomes, this outcome? So when you, on the next slide, when you enter a conflict resolution session, if you want to talk, think about that this way, to find a win-win solution, first, you need to find normally a neutral environment and come with an open mindset. If you come already saying, I will crush him, I will definitely show that he's wrong, that's not how you will resolve the conflict. It will be a win-lose, it will not be a win-win. So come with an open mind saying, okay, maybe he has something, important to say, or I didn't consider that. Let's see what he has to say. So the next step is to understand where the other one stands. So active listening there, the method that we saw earlier, is very important to listen to the other side of the story and try to identify from the other's perspective the source of the conflict. Then it's your turn to talk about what you feel within this situation. So your side of the story, again, using I as much as possible. How do you feel? How do you perceive the situation? Why you did that? So that it's something that is personal. And then the next phase is probably the most important one, is to look at several possible outcomes or solutions and try to see what will be the impact of each solution. So if confrontation and it's a win-lose situation, you have to understand what will be the impact next time we have to work together again. So each discussion, the discussion should look at the long-term impact of each of the solutions that are brought forward. And finally, hopefully you can agree on one solution that will fit both and will allow this solution to be implemented, and you will allow the team to continue to work together. So these are the 5 steps of resolving a conflict: creating a good environment, understanding the other, clarifying your own perspective, trying to generate alternatives, and finally try to solve the issue together. So in summary, communication skills are really important in teamwork. That's why I tried to link the two. So not just talk about communication for itself, but we communicate because we are part of a society, a team, and people working together to help patients. So I hope this helped you to understand where these very important communication skills like assertive communication, active listening, and conflict resolution come within the whole dynamics of a teamwork. I thank you, and I'll be open for questions now or maybe later. I'll check the Q&A box to see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pierre, for that presentation. It was really interesting how you set the scene with a real hospital scenario where the impact of failure in communication, and leading us through the Tuckman stages, and basically providing us with practical tips on how to avoid these situations from happening, so we are able to provide optimum care in our settings. I'll quickly look through the chat box, and if there are no questions, we would be proceeding to the next session. The next session will be by David Stibb, who is a clinical assistant professor and director of global engagement at UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy. David, if you're ready for your presentation, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much, Suleiman, and thank you also, Professor Pierre, for the great remarks. I will be discussing negotiation and resilience, if we want to go to the next slide. And I think a lot of the points that we just heard from Professor Pierre are going to be applicable. And how do we negotiate a certain problem that we may have? And when we talk about negotiation, this is not just negotiation for one's job or one's salary, one's responsibilities. I want you to think about negotiation as something that takes place every day. Conversations with coworkers, conversations with family members. Those can all be viewed as negotiations and trying to get to a win-win situation. In addition to negotiation, I'm going to talk about resilient skills and how we can really bounce back from setbacks. And if we want to go to the next slide here, we'll start first with negotiation. Now, most of my points are going to come from this book that you see here on the right-hand side, Getting to Yes. Getting to Yes was first published in 1981. Since then, it's been revised and translated into many languages and produced in many countries throughout the world. It is often known in the negotiation world as the go-to resource for negotiating. And in Getting to Yes, they outline these 4 key principles that you see here on your screen. Separate people from the problem. Focus on interest, not positions. Positions being a decision that you may have regarding the problem. Generate options for mutual gain, creating that win-win scenario. And then using fair and objective criteria. I'm going to touch on each of these briefly for the negotiation section of today. And we'll start with the next slide of separating people from the problem. So I think when we're negotiating anything from one's job salary to maybe convincing a friend that they should become vaccinated, that's often a common healthcare negotiation that we see in today's world. We have to be cognizant that we're dealing with people, and people can interpret the facts differently. And so this first point about perception, when we go into a negotiation, we want to understand for the particular problem, what are the facts that we're talking about? And then how do we view those facts differently? And I think, again, that the COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy scenario is a great example, because while we have a wealth of safety and efficacy data that most people, especially healthcare providers, pharmacists, and pharmaceutical scientists like yourself would agree with, saying, yes, this makes sense, this is safe and effective to be administered, we must acknowledge that people view those facts and those data points differently. And we must also accept that somebody's different view on something, it's not right or wrong, it's different, and we need to respect those differences. So negotiation is often perceived as it's a hard stance, it's this way or it's that way, it's right or wrong, it's win or lose. But really the first step in principled negotiation here is to discuss openly with each other and communicate each other's different perspectives, and not to judge, but to be respectful while you're understanding what those differences are. Inherently within those differences is the next point here about emotion. We're human beings, we all have emotion. And if we can go back to the previous slide, we want to recognize and legitimize people's emotions. We want to be able to understand what they're feeling. 70% of decision-making is actually emotion-based. 70%, that's the limbic system. We're not going to talk about neuroscience today, but recognizing how much emotions play into this is key. And then finally, communication. You want to listen and acknowledge, just like Professor Pierre said, active listening is key. So when you discuss differences, when you acknowledge emotions, you are then reaffirming that you understand that person's position, and it will lead to better conversations. So that's the first principle negotiation step. The second step on the next slide is focusing on interests, not positions. Now, this is all about understanding why somebody has that certain perception, why somebody believes what they believe. And so this is a bit of analyzing the problem with each other again. So again, traditionally, negotiation is viewed as right, wrong, win, lose. This is an opportunity to discuss, recognize emotions, and to understand why somebody believes, say, the COVID vaccine is not safe. Why do you believe that? By going there, you are building that trust, which will lead to a better solution, even if you disagree and don't believe with what they're saying. Another common point we need to consider is that we're all human beings and we all have certain interests that underpin our positions on something. And that may be economic well-being, a sense of belonging, recognition, the desire to control our lives, autonomy. If we understand that these are all subconscious factors when going into a negotiation, we can get a better outcome. But we want to focus on what people are interested in, why they believe something, not just what they are saying. Get down to the why of the matter. And then the last point on this slide is the focus on interests will allow for a win-win scenario, not a win-lose. So this is the collaborating or the compromising category you heard about from Professor Pierre. Interest removes a little bit of the personal element and really focuses on the issue, not the individual. So once we are at this stage, we'll go to the next slide, to our third principle of negotiation, and that's generating options for mutual gain. Now here, this is where you want to work together to brainstorm the problem and generate options. You don't want to go into the negotiation saying, this is the only option available. And you don't want to say, this is what I'll take or I'll walk away. Again, I think that's the stereotype of negotiation, but you actually want to talk with each other, work with each other, and understand what's possible without making judgment. And when you brainstorm these different ideas, you want to focus not on the decision of which one is best and trying to push for that decision. You really just want to focus on what are the possibilities. And to do that, I've highlighted this diagram that I found to be a very useful tool, again, for a variety of daily negotiation scenarios, project management, to my own job for responsibilities. And that's starting with step one, what is the problem? Why is this the problem for step two, analyzing this? Step three, what can we do about this? And again, work together to brainstorm. And then step four, don't judge or select which one approach would be best, but then to explore what could be done with each other. Now, here's some obstacles that you want to watch out for. Four I've highlighted below from the book Getting to Yes. The first is premature judgment. Premature judgment means that you've already made a decision going into the negotiation about what is the approach we're going to take. That will limit the brainstorming of possibilities. The second is a single answer mindset. There is always more than one possibility if you're brainstorming negotiation options. Similarly, with the fixed pie assumption, the options aren't fixed. There's not just one pie that you can take from. You can actually expand the proverbial pie into more options, more decisions by working with each other. And then finally, where negotiations often fail, is having a "that's not my problem" mindset. In other words, sometimes we go back to those emotions, 70% of decisions which are based upon, and we think to ourselves, that's not fair, and that's their problem, not my problem, so they should fix it. Again, we need to come together to fix the problem, not put blame or judgment, which is hard to do, and I will acknowledge, this all takes practice. Practice, practice, practice. And then finally, we'll go to the next slide, the final slide for negotiation. The fourth principle is using fair and objective criteria. The reason this is so important is because sometimes our emotions can get a hold of us during negotiation conversations. We can get a sense of this isn't going in the right direction or this is not fair. But if we use objective criteria, which the two parties in the negotiation decide, if we use objective criteria, we can make steady progress along the way. And the way that we do that is we frame each issue as a joint search for objective criteria. So just like the last step, we don't go into the negotiation with a defined single solution mentality. We don't go into the negotiation with one defined set of criteria that we're going to use to judge the options. You build those together. Almost, you can think of it as a team. Be open-minded as to which are most reasonable, and never bend to pressure, always to principle. And to the last point about not bending to pressure and only to principle, we're going to move on to the next slide as far as talking about one's BATNA and ZOPA. I'd be curious if our audience, and you can feel free to use the chat, if you've ever heard of BATNA or ZOPA. It's even relatively new to myself. But even in negotiations, the one thing you do want to walk into a negotiation with in advance is your BATNA. That's your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. A BATNA can also be considered, that's kind of the worst case outcome for you. This is the minimum that you would accept. By understanding what your absolute minimum is, it allows you to navigate negotiation conversations very effectively. If you do not have a BATNA going into a negotiation, you are essentially negotiating blindly, which usually does not end well. So this gives you flexibility when you're brainstorming together different approaches, whether that range of approaches, that range of solutions, whether there's something in there that at least meets your minimum standards, your BATNA. And having a clear BATNA allows you to have more power and confidence in the negotiation. And then finally, it allows you to understand your ZOPA, which is the zone of potential agreement. If we go to the next slide, this is a diagram here. And as a quick example, say you're looking to sell your car and you are the seller, that's the top section. And you said, hey, I would love to get $10,000 for my car. That's the seller's desired price. But if I can't get 10, my minimum, my worst case scenario, my BATNA, it would be $5,000. Now the buyer, the person you're selling the car to, is probably saying, well, I don't want to pay a lot for this. I would love to pay $2,000 for this car. That's the buyer's desired price. But the buyer says, well, that might be too low. So, you know, the highest I'll go is $8,000. Therefore, your ZOPA is the seller's worst case, $5,000, to the buyer's worst case, $8,000. And the point of this is you should not only go into a negotiation with your worst case scenario, your BATNA, but you should try to predict and analyze what would be the BATNA on the other side, the other party. That will allow you to have a more effective negotiation, a better outcome, and remember, this is not win-lose. Generate a win-win, which is in the ZOPA range. Going on, we're going to transition now from negotiation to resilience on the next slide. And you all heard of resilience. And resilience is absolutely a part of negotiation. They're interrelated. But just focusing on this, it's the process of adapting well in the face of adversity in times of trauma or significant stress. And this is from the American Psychological Association. There's many different definitions, but this is the one that I like to use for the next few slides. And when we talk about resilience, a common way to think about it is bouncing back. And we need to think about, where does resilience come from? In a recent survey of 835 British employees through the Harvard Business Review, a lot of it comes from you. You are driving resilience. It comes from your relationships, and that's why we always say surround yourself with good people, because in addition to yourself, those around you is where you're really pulling your ability to overcome setbacks and to bounce back. If we go to the next slide here, I think it's important to understand what's holding you back. And in the same survey, go straight down to the bottom, managing difficult relationships and conflict in the workplace. And that's why I think it's so important for you to walk away with the points that I and Professor Pierre and the rest of our speakers today are going to be presenting. In addition to conflict and difficult relationships, the volume of work. And we definitely see that with the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is important to be mindful of, understanding not only what resilience is, but where it's potentially getting away from you. And finally, the last slide I have on on the next slide is some science-backed strategies for how to build resilience. I figured we're all scientists, so let's go with evidence-based strategies. The first is change the narrative. These are all backed by data, the references below. I'm not going to get into the studies, but practicing expressive writing, that's writing down your thoughts, feelings. This could be journaling. This could be having a diary. Expressing it through that medium has been shown to improve one's own well-being. Facing your fears in small bits at a time, small segments, can allow you to take that next big step that may present itself in your life. Practicing self-compassion. It's really important, and it's hard though, not to judge, but really to confront suffering and those feelings with an attitude of warmth and kindness, not to make it personal. Again, not to judge. Meditation, some of you may practice meditation on a daily basis, but this has been known and evidence-backed to be more in tune with helping you overcome not only issues with the past and present, but it really helps you focus on what's happening in the now. And then finally, cultivating forgiveness. This is your commitment to forgive, to let go of resentment, and for your own sake. Not for the sake of others, they may be wrong, but really for your own sake, to let go and to move forward. With that, I'd like to thank everybody. I've put my email on the next slide, and I'll hand things back over to Suleiman.
Thank you very much, David, for a very insightful presentation there. I mean, it's really interesting getting to hear about the concepts of the best alternative to a negotiated agreement being coupled with the a zone of potential agreements when we go into these situations. And lastly, I think for myself and also the rest of the audience listening today, making us more aware of where resilience comes from and factors that would be holding us back was very insightful, that I feel the rest, everyone would benefit from clearly in deciding which of the evidence-based strategies that we would use in dealing with these. Before I introduce our next speaker, I would want a second to quickly see if we could switch the slides we were using here, if that's possible. Thank you. All right, thank you very much. So our next speaker is Dr. Ruth Edwards from Aston Pharmacy School in the UK. And I will be letting us tell us a bit about her background, and then we'll move straight into our presentation. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Ruth.
Thank you so much, Suleiman, and thanks to both Pierre and David. I think there's huge amount of alignment in the topics that we're all covering, and they're all incredibly complementary, and I'll definitely be referring back to both of your interesting presentations as I go through. So I'm a pharmacist. I'm absolutely passionate about learning. I work in a school of pharmacy and trying to be as creative as I can be in terms of my educational approaches. Like David, happy to connect with people on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Ruth Edwards 101. So feel free to connect with me there and share some of your experiences. So if we can move into slides about what I'm going to cover today. So Raman, thank you. I am going to be talking a bit about leadership skills, developing leadership skills, and the link to emotional intelligence. And the reason we're looking at this is that there is some evidence out there that emotional intelligence is a key determinant of effective leadership. So if we can move on, Suleiman, thank you. So this quote is from John Maxwell, who is a leadership guru in the United States. I was introduced to his work by Toyin from Howard University, who many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. And it actually was through doing a part of the YPG program and facilitating a book club that I came across this book, and I would highly recommend it. I've got the reference to it later on, so you can have a look at it for yourself. But Maxwell says that leadership is not about our positions or about flow charts. It's very much about one life influencing other, and that's a reciprocal relationship. And I would argue that emotional intelligence is a massive part of that. So I'm going to come back to Maxwell in just a bit. Thank you, Suleiman. So this is a different set of slides, sorry. This is do you have the others available? You may need to unshare your screen and reshare it, sorry, apologies for that. So I confess that this is my fault because I was very late in getting the slides to Emmanuel. Sorry about this, Suleiman. So while Suleiman works on getting the slides up, perhaps you could put into the chat just some information about your leadership experience, whether that be leading a project, whether it be leading people, whether that be leading a particular service. Maybe just put some things into the chat so we can link back to that once someone's able to get the slides available. Okay, so while Suleiman is doing that, let me tell you a little bit about a leadership experience that I had last year. I launched an elective for our final year in students and on leadership and management, and I will pick up on some of the content of that when we get the slides back. Once we started this elective with fourth year Pharm students, and to be honest, they were a little bit uncomfortable at the start because they said things to me like, what do I need to learn for this? Thank you, Sophia, for popping something into the chat. What do I need to learn for this? Amazing, Suleiman, thank you. I'll just finish this little bit of the story. And what I ended up saying to them was that there's quite a lot of learning involved, but most of it is actually reflection. So back to David's point about resilience, about building yourself as a leader, that actually reflection, self-reflection and personal reflection, sometimes using frameworks is really helpful to do. And we had a really successful 8 to 10 weeks working on that. And I'm hoping to write that up for publication quite soon. So thank you, Suleiman, for that. What is emotional intelligence and why do we need it? Well, Gleason argues that it's this act of knowing, understanding and responding to emotions. It's about overcoming stress in the moment, and it's also about being aware of how your words and actions affect others. And is described, all of this is described as emotional intelligence. So immediately, I'm sure you can see the links to what Pierre was talking about around communication and around team working, and also what David was talking about in relation to negotiation and resilience. And it's absolutely argued that emotional intelligence is a key component of leadership. There has been a lot of debate about emotional intelligence in the literature. I think if you're interested in it, you can read quite a lot about it. A lot of it is quite theoretical debate, like does it actually exist and so on. and a lot of the applied research has shown that emotional intelligence is a very strong predictor of leadership success. It's in, hence us referring to it in this session. Thank you, Suleiman. If you can move the next slide, please. So what I want to move back to is leadership skills, and then I will come back in with the emotional intelligence aspect of it. And I wanted to share with you a UK-based document which I've used in this leadership elective that I was explaining to you. Not specifically for you to adopt this, but because I think there are some really helpful frameworks which help us kind of reflect on where we are with our leadership. And this Royal Pharmaceutical Society Advanced Pharmacy Framework actually was the brainchild of Catherine Duggan, who's now CEO of FIP. And I worked with Catherine on some of the early development of this. And it's been an incredibly useful tool for people throughout the continuum of practice in the UK. So we move from sort of foundation level, which is where some of you may be at, into the advanced level, and then moving into consultant level. And the area that I want to focus on is the bit about halfway down, which is the sort of leadership and management elements of this. Thank you, Suleiman. So what is within the pharmacy framework is a whole set of advanced criteria or skills that we can measure and that people can measure themselves against and submit for accreditation. So for recognition at this level. The APF is designed for people who are at least 3 years qualified. So this may be ahead for some of you. But what I quite like about it is that it stretches. So I use this with my undergraduate students, and I was quite clear with them that they weren't intended to be mapping to this level at this point, but I wanted something for them to aim to as they move through their career. So the elements in the Advanced Pharmacy Framework, which I would argue relate to leadership and to management, are all about collaborative working relationships, and Pierre has already talked about the importance of those, importance of communication, the importance of teamwork. So those are not classified or grouped with leadership skills, but they're absolutely core to the development of leadership. And so these are under what we call cluster of collaborative working relationships, which I would argue is a core part. One of the interesting debates is about what is leadership and what is management, and there's all sorts of quotes out there which you may or may not find helpful, but what the APF have done is divide the skills needed into two groups, two clusters, one around leadership and one around management. In some of the early career frameworks, leadership and management are combined. So again, this is another reason why I found the advanced framework really helpful for pushing my students to think ahead. So strategy, governance, vision and innovation, service development and motivation are the aspects that are grouped under leadership. But there is quite a bit of overlap with management as well. So thinking about implementing national priorities, resource utilization, both financial, physical and people resources, standards of practice, managing risk, managing performance, project management, managing change, strategic planning, which very much crosses over with leadership and working across boundaries. Okay, so these are some of the things that, that the APF describes. And Suleiman, if you can show the next slide, this is small, but the link to the actual document is available on the slide. And the really helpful thing about this is that it defines different levels of development. So advanced stage 1 is the first level of the advanced pharmacy framework that moves right up to mastery. And this is very much for people who want to be accredited at those levels. But I found, in terms of getting my students to think about this, that thinking about these descriptions was really helpful for them in terms of doing a needs analysis of where they're at with their leadership skills. So for example, strategic context at advanced stage 1, the practitioner would demonstrate an understanding of the needs of stakeholders and that their practice would reflect the relevant local and national policy. So that is very much about having an awareness of the strategic context that the individual was working in. As you move through the levels, you become more involved in developing that strategic context. So advanced stage 2 is the ability to incorporate relevant national policy to influence local strategy. So it's much more about having influence, but it's using that national level and sometimes international as well. And then mastery is about demonstrating active participation in creating relevant national policies. Now, what I found in discussion with my students, is that very few of them had considered that strategic context at all in their working. And so what we did was we talked about, how our strategies developed, what's the importance of strategies. We looked at some examples of national policies from the UK, and I got them to start thinking about where their practice would fit within that national context. And so therefore you can do the same for each of these aspects, for this and for management, without even working towards submission of a portfolio. And I just think it's really helpful to think about where they're at. And a number of my students said to me, I don't know anything about strategy, and we had the conversation that actually they probably did, they just didn't recognize it as strategy. And by the end of the module, they were saying, oh, but I'm still not sure where I'm at in terms of this mapping. And I said, well, do you know what? Actually, even just having an awareness of strategy as something that's important is actually, you're going to be a step ahead of a number of practitioners out there who basically get on with their day-to-day work and don't think about the wider context. So I would argue that that's a huge step in taking ownership of your leadership skills, is looking at the wider context, whether that be locally, nationally or internationally, and really starting to think about both how that impacts on your practice, but then how you start to influence. So that's just taking one example. I'm not going to run through the others, and you're very welcome to do that yourself. But if we can move on, Suleiman. Here are some of the things that I would suggest will help you develop your leadership skills. So the first one is seek out and take opportunities. It's about small opportunities, it's about big opportunities, it's about anything that you think might help you develop. It was interesting, I had a conversation with a colleague who said that when she was in a particular role, when her boss said to her, would you go and represent me at this meeting or attend this meeting? She took a positive attitude to it and said, actually, I'm going to see this as an opportunity for both networking, understanding how the bigger picture works and all of that, rather than seeing it as my boss dumping on me or dumping on me in this situation. So seeing every task that you do as an opportunity to develop is another way of developing your leadership skills. So thinking, first of all, about what your skills are, what the gaps are, and then seeing every task as an opportunity to move through that continuum, if you like. I've mentioned positive attitude, and again, it's an incredibly important part of emotional intelligence, which we'll speak about in just a minute. Building relationships and building your network is incredibly important in developing leadership, because you can learn from other people, you can develop through listening to other people, and having effective role models is a really important part of that. Linking back to David's point about reflection and becoming reflective, it's really important to ask for feedback from people. So not just looking at your perceptions of your leadership, but asking for 360-degree feedback from people involved in projects with you, from your line manager, and potentially from people that you're leading projects with. And ask for mentorship. I think one of the amazing opportunities in being involved in the Young Pharmacists group is being able to connect with people and to seek mentorship from people who you see as effective role models. Thank you, Suleiman. So moving back to emotional intelligence, we've described what it was, and I would argue it's a really strong component of being an effective leader is being emotionally intelligent. And here are some of the elements of emotional intelligence that, again, you can read this if you want to later, the references later on. So having self-awareness is a really important part of emotional intelligence. It's about knowledge of your own internal states, your preferences, your resources that you can draw on, and some of your intuition. And that's a continual thing for most people. Understanding yourself is something that you will never stop learning about. And it's important to just have that self-awareness. It's about developing that, is about focusing on developing a greater awareness of your own internal states, knowing the values that are important to you as a leader. And that's something that I've revisited just very, very recently as part of some professional development, thinking about what those key values are. But back to some of the points that Pierre was making, don't always assume that people share those values with you. So when they start to behave, people behave in line with their values. And when you see those behaviors and those are out of line with your values, remember that they potentially have different values, and trying to understand that is really important. And ways that you can develop that self-awareness, coaching and mentoring. I've been doing a period of personal coaching recently, and that has been hugely helpful in terms of developing my own self-awareness and responses to difficult situations in particular. Second part is self-regulation. So that's about managing your internal state. It's managing your impulses, it's managing the resources available to you, and your ability to manage your own impulses and resources so that you maintain, you stay true to your own values. So that's why it's important to know what your values are and what your purpose and values are. And some of the ways that you can enhance your self-regulation is about feedback, 360-degree feedback, coaching and mentoring again, and you may decide that you have skills development needs. So whether that be around communication, whether that be around other aspects of being a leader, you may wish to do some training around particular skills. And then I've grouped motivation, empathy, and social skills together. Motivation tends to be have the emotional tendencies that facilitate goal achievement, and I'll come back to that in a second. Empathy is being aware of others people's feelings, needs, and concerns. Again, very much linked to what our previous speakers have spoken about. And those social skills are the ability to provoke a desirable response in others. And things you can do to develop all three of these are really around finding out what motivates individuals in your team. And you can't do that without having conversations and particularly active listening to them. Really important to understand what makes people tick, what gets them going, what gets them out of bed in the morning, and therefore what will motivate them to do a good job. And some of it will be different things motivate different people, and therefore you as a leader, you may need to adapt your strategies to target those motivational things. It's about listening. It's about trying to understand people's perspective. That increases our empathy, our understanding of people, and that links very strongly to how we develop empathy and our relationship with patients. All of you will be working in some way either with people or with people as patients, and so therefore empathy is a huge part of our communication in that. And social skills and communication skills particularly, there's a lot of research out there and a lot of development information out there about adapting your communication style to suit the situation and the listener. And there are a couple of really short but interesting books on dealing with difficult people, which talks about the types of personalities you will encounter in both the workplace and in your personal life, and how to adapt your communication to get the best out of those difficult personalities. So I'm happy to share those at the end if people are interested. So some of the articles I've referenced, actually, if we can just go back one slide, sorry, Solomon, for that. I wanted just to give you an example of a situation where I used emotional intelligence as part of my leadership. I started the role that I have 3 years ago. I moved institution, I moved country actually, and completely moved jobs. And when I arrived, we had just done a piece of work, a bit of reconstruction on a teaching facility that I was going to be responsible for. And it was a skills area, pharmacy skills area. The work was being done as I arrived. And then very rapidly, there was some delays in the work. And so therefore, people were coming back in to teach in September in a very different environment to the one that they were in before. And it fairly quickly became evident to me and to others that there were some real challenges with this. And there was quite a lot of resistance to this area for all sorts of different reasons. There was a perception of lack of consultation. So the work just had to be done and for things to move on, but people felt that they perhaps hadn't had the input to the design of the facility that they wanted to have. And so factored into that was the fact that I'd arrived really brand new, and that people kept saying to me, have you met this person? Have you met that person? And this person had been teaching in the department for 30 years, was a very strong personality, or is a very strong personality. And people kept saying to me that, actually, you're going to have to get to know this person, and she's going to be your biggest challenge. So I was starting to get a bit apprehensive about meeting this individual who only worked term time, and so therefore I didn't have much time to get to know her before we ended up in this very challenging situation. So what did I do? I got everybody together. I set an hour's time. I provided some cake just to kind of break the ice a little bit. And I said to everybody, I'm going to listen to the problems, and you can just put those across, but we're going to set a time limit on how long we're going to do that. And we did actively listen to what everybody's concerns were about this particular facility, what the issues were. And then I said, right, we've raised all the concerns. Now what we need to do is work towards a solution together. So let's have some discussion about ways that we can resolve the issues that some of the things that you've raised cannot be resolved. So how can we work around those? It's about that compromise and that negotiation. And what can we change and what can't we change? The facility is not going to change. So what can we do to make it better for what we're trying to achieve? And that was really successful. And particularly the lady who everybody predicted was going to be really difficult came on board incredibly quickly with a really positive attitude, because I'd managed to work out quite quickly what it was that made her tick and tap into that motivation in terms of understanding her and her passion for a positive experience for the students, and that they had to be the best they can be. So that's just an example. Thank you, Solomon. If we can move to the references slide. There's a few resources there that you might find helpful. And Marshall's book, Developing the Leader Within You, is an incredibly useful book if you decide to access it. It's incredibly helpful about developing you as a leader. Those of you that have been on the YPG leadership group development program will have read it and hopefully had experience about how helpful it is. Thank you very much, Solomon. And I can see there's a few questions. I think we'll pick those up at the end, if that's all right, to allow us to move on.
Thank you so much for really connecting all of the concepts from the communication, negotiation to emotional intelligence. There's one particular question I would hope you could maybe throw some light on before we move on to the next question. And that's from someone here who says, I have limited leadership experience, but will be representing my university as the global health lead in collaboration with other institutions, as well as serve as the new global health committee chairman. My key issue is working with faculty members who are unable to invest time into the project as it is considered as volunteer work, not considered in the AOR. So this really sounds like a fascinating case, which if you could briefly talk about.
Absolutely, absolutely. So really interesting when you've got people that are either unable or unwilling to engage for whatever reason. Absolutely massive challenge as a leader. It might be that you want to try and tap into what motivates them. So why are they involved in this project in the first place? And what's in it for them, as well as so for example, just making this personal, I get involved in these kind of things because I get a lot of satisfaction about supporting people to develop. And so that's my motivation for being involved in FIP webinars. But not everybody will have the same motivation. So some people, it might be about their status. Some people might be about, being named on an important development group, but actually they physically don't have the time to contribute to it. And that I recognize is a massive challenge. Sometimes leaders have to make difficult decisions. And so therefore, sometimes you might need to go to and get some support about redefining the membership of the group. If people are not able or willing to be involved, then maybe it is just taking that difficult decision and saying, actually, if you can't contribute the time to this, you can't be involved in it. Now, you would probably want to do that in a more negotiative style than that David has described. I'm being fairly blunt with you just now, and that's clearly not a way to negotiate with people. But sometimes leaders have to take those difficult decisions. It would be important to get support from others in doing that. So again, happy to chat that through in more detail in the questions once Rebecca's delivered her topic, if you like.
All right, thank you very much. I'm sure there are other follow-up questions that are related that we're happy to take at the end, but I see we are really pressed for time now. So apologies, Rebecca. We would get started with you. Kindly talk a bit about yourself, and we're happy to get into your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Suleiman, and thank you to the other speakers. It's been so interesting to hear all your talks. So my name is Rebecca Isaacson. I am currently a postdoctoral research assistant at the Department of Chemistry at UCL in London. My research focus is on delivering antimicrobial peptides to gram-negative bacteria. I am also the current chair of the FIP Special Interest Group for a new generation of pharmaceutical scientists. If you are interested in learning more what we do in our group, please follow us on Twitter, where we post about webinars we're participating in or arranging, but also follow us on our LinkedIn group, where we post interesting material as well. So during my talk, as you will see in this next slide, I will be first touching upon training and certification, which is really the foundation of your career. So if we move to the next slide. So formal training is, of course, an important part of building your career. And I will briefly touch on this because, as I've highlighted here, it will vary a lot between countries and regions. But for most pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists, your education will be divided into sort of 3 levels. It'll be a bachelor level, a master level, or a doctorate level. If you are educating yourself as a pharmacist, of course, you'll be eligible for a national certification to work as a pharmacist. This is how it's in most countries, that you need to have a certificate to work as a pharmacist, mainly because you're involved in healthcare, and as a healthcare professional, you'll need to be certified. One issue that we face in sort of a global world is that not all certification is valid in other countries or other regions. And this is something you'll need to keep in mind, and I'll touch upon that on the next slide as well, when you decide where you want to work, because you may need to do a lot of extra and additional training and certification when you move between different countries, for example. if you go sort of more the pharmaceutical scientist pathway, again, bachelor, master, and doctorate levels, these tend to be sort of recognized regardless of where you go, but you also won't be able to work as a pharmacist in a pharmacy or within the healthcare environment, which is probably also why you're doing your education in a pharmaceutical sciences field, because you'll more likely work within research or industry or in a government setting. But these are more likely to be recognized between different countries. Now, a lot of the sort of skills that we've heard about today, leadership, emotional intelligence, and communication, negotiation, and all these things, are to various extents part of your formal training. And it's important, if you get these opportunities during your education, to actually get involved in those classes. Perhaps seek them out yourself, check your university or your college, do they have these type of classes? Can you sign up for them extra? Because it is something that's very good to have with you. It is, of course, even if you get sort of a certification that you've participated in a class, that might not mean that you are the best leader or have the best communication skills. It might be hard for others to judge as well. And that's where networking, that I'll touch upon later, will also come in and become important for you to have a network that can attest to your leadership skills and your communication skills. But I think it's important to remember that throughout all of your career, you will be learning new things. And like Ruth and David and Pierre touched upon, challenge yourself, do get involved, have a positive outlook, and see everything as an opportunity to learn and to improve, rather than something that's imposed on you and something you need to do. See it as an opportunity to learn, because that will really help you moving forward. Now, on the next slide, I'm just going to briefly touch upon a webinar series that MySig hosted earlier this year. If you're an FIP member, you can view these afterwards. But once you have your training and your certification, it will be sort of a question, sort of, what do you need for which job? What type of training and certification do you need? And this will be very dependent on the position you're looking for and also the field you're looking for. Now, the three webinars that we had looked at different careers, so 2 from industry, 2 from academia, and 2 from government. And they had very varied levels on what they had felt was a requirement for them to do, but also showed and highlighted that you might not have to fulfill everything that is advertised or asked for in the advertisement. You can learn that afterwards. You just need to be open with what are your strengths and what can you bring to the table, but what are also your weaknesses and what might need to improve. But if you want to learn more about these ones, please do check them out through this link. And if we go to the next slide, you can also use this YPG toolkit that these webinars are also working around. And I really recommend everyone to have a look in there, because they highlight different careers for pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists, and can it really help you understand kind of what is needed and what kind of training do you need to go into different fields. And it does discuss different career paths, opportunities, how to develop different skills, and also how to transfer skills, and also provide some activities to help you progress. So I really do recommend this. And it's an important way to be proactive with your career and not just let things happen, but to think about, what do I want to do and what resources can I access to try to bring myself there. And do try to look at the resources that David and Pierre and Ruth have also suggested. You might not want to read them all, but you could at least look at some of them to help you get an understanding of where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses, and how can you develop that. Now, as I mentioned before, it's important to remember and to think about what country you want to make a career in. Because a global career can be quite hard, because certification, like I mentioned, is not valid everywhere globally. So if you, for example, work in Thailand and you get your training in the UK, you may need to do training if you want to return and work in Thailand or Southeast Asia to get yourself certified for that. So I think it's really important. Part of being proactive about your career is to actually think about, where do I want to work? Ruth mentioned this really good framework that the Royal Pharmaceutical Society in the UK have put together. There are similar resources from FIP, the Global Competency Framework. If we could go back, please. Could we go to the previous slide, please? Thank you. So the Global Competency Framework, you can find that online and look at that. That can also help you in being proactive in understanding what is needed. But there's also the Global Advanced Development Framework, as well as an extensive FIP library for you to use as a member to help you in your career. Now, these two frameworks are mostly focused on pharmacy and the pharmacy field, but it is being adapted to also support and help pharmacists. If we move to the next slide, please. So the second part I wanted to bring into this, and Pierre and David and Ruth have all touched upon this, and sure that formal education is important and you need to sort of strive to pass and get your degree and your certification, but it's also important to remember that your formal training at a university or a college is only one part of your education, and sort of gaining these skills is only one part of your education. When you're in university, it's an excellent place to learn and try to develop leadership skills, like Ruth talked about, to seek out opportunities, volunteer in student organizations or international networks. It's a great way of developing your communication skills. You're working in teams, developing your team working abilities. And then you can also try, when you're working in a team and maybe you're not all wanting to go the same way, you have a chance to apply the tools that that David provided in negotiations. So see every opportunity throughout your training as well as to develop these soft skills such as leadership, communication, teamwork, and also try to really be active in that and be positive and have a positive outlook on that. Your university education and college education is also when you start to build your network, which will be the second part of what I talk about. So effective networking is really a great way to advance your career. And if we move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So having a wide and diverse network can really be amazing in so many ways. I would not be here today if I had not worked actively getting myself involved with national organizations that then led to me being involved in FIP, that has now led to me being here talking to you today. So having a diverse network can help you in hearing about opportunities from other parts of your network. It can also be a great way of getting recommended for positions, and you can also use your network to sort of showcase or provide sort of context to leadership skills and communication skills if that's needed for a position, for example. And I've also found that I've been able to sort of reach out to my network and ask for help. If I run into issues that's not within my research field, I have made friends and colleagues in other fields, and I've been able to reach out to them and say, hey, how are you doing? I've run into this issue, and I immediately started thinking about you because I know you're really good at this. Do you have like a few minutes to just catch up on Zoom, and I could just get your feedback on what do you think about this? And people are usually very open to that, and it's been a great help to me. So it's important to try to always get sort of and build a wide and diverse network. And I think the important thing to remember is that networking isn't always about approaching those who are on a higher level than you and building a network sort of upwards. Networking is a 360 activity. If you have a chance to interact with students who are younger than you, that's also building a network. Interact with those who are on the same level, also building a network. But also if you have a chance to interact with people who are further along in their career, is also part of networking. Now, David mentioned something really important when he talked about building resilience, and that was to face your fears. And I understand that not everyone is a sort of Olympic champion in social interactions, and you don't have to be. You just have to be a little bit brave and start facing those fears. Maybe you don't have to approach a senior lecturer and try to build a network or network with them. Maybe you start small and you start interacting with your classmates. If we move to the next slide, please. So here I'm just trying to summarize a few places where you can network, and Ruth touched upon this as well. And be active. During your formal training, your network will be your classmates and teams that you meet when you volunteer for things at your university, student organizations and things like that. Can you get involved in training, mentoring younger students? Then you're networking both with younger students, but also a chance for you to meet professors or lecturers or researchers and network with them. If you're able to go to a conference or a congress, of course, that's an excellent place to network, but you have to then also be active. You can't just expect to go to a lecture and just listen to them and then think, I'm just going to add this lecturer to my network and then we will be connected. They won't know who you are if there's a room full of 100 people. You need to interact with them. Ask questions, approach them. If you go to a poster session, don't just read the poster. I tend to just read the headline and then I ask the person presenting a poster, I think your title sounds really interesting. Would you mind just telling me briefly about your research? A lot of people like to talk about their research, so it's quite easy to get a conversation. And then you can practice what David talked about, active listening, really focusing, what are they saying? Ask follow-up questions. And then at the end, ask them if you could add them on LinkedIn or if they have a business card. And that way you can sort of build a network with people who maybe you won't see them as collaborators or people that you're planning to work with in the future, but you never know when you might need that network. So be open to networking away from your own research field or training field as well. Don't forget career fairs. I did this when I was at university. I volunteered at career fairs. It's a great way to meet companies and get a feel for what you can learn or what you can do at a company, what type of careers, what type of skills are they looking for. Could we just move back to the last slide, please? Thank you. So another thing that's also important to remember, look at national and international organizations such as FIP and YPG. Are there opportunities to get actively involved? I know that YPG is soon going to be announcing a lot of positions. If you want to build and work on your soft skills, make sure you apply to those and try to get involved. You will have a great opportunity to build a global network. Are there mentorship programs that you can get involved in? It's another way of networking and to build a global network. I included these three sort of signs for different places where people network, but I think it's important to be mindful that not everyone sees all social media as a sort of a professional setting. LinkedIn and Twitter, my experience is where people mostly have professional relationships, whereas sort of Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and all of these tend to be more private settings. So be also mindful of which social media you reach out to people on. They might not be happy to add you on their Facebook, but they might be very happy to add you on their LinkedIn. So my closing remark is this, and people tend to think about success as a linear process. It really isn't. Success, you'll change your mind, you will do other things, you'll have setbacks and ups and downs, and try to not be scared of those changes, and not view your career as a failure just because it's not a straight line. No one's career is a straight line. And remember, you can always change your mind. If you feel after a few years, you know what, I'm not happy in this position, better to just start looking for something else than to work with something that you're not happy with. So I will leave the floor open to a few questions if there are any. I know that we're running out of time. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that excellent wrap up to our conversation so far today. I'd like to sincerely thank our chair and the panelists, and I would like to remind our participants or people in the audience here that the webinar recordings would be available on the website at www.fip.org. And if you're not a member yet, please feel free to register and encourage your friends to do so as well. Over the course of the presentation, a lot of the topics that we have spoken about, from leadership skills to negotiation, communication, and I think even more importantly, the career development toolkit here contains great resources, frameworks, activity sheets that we could use to begin to practice and get into the weeds in developing this sort of skills. So please feel free to use the QR code on the screen to access this resource directly. And please, thank you so much for your attention. Please provide your feedback so we will continue to improve our digital event offerings. Thank you very much and good day to you all. Thank you for your time.